When things went south with my parents, I had no choice but to move out. I was in a tough spot, crashing on friends' couches for as long as I could, but I knew that wasn't a real solution. I needed a place of my own. I scoured every apartment app, every roommate listing, and eventually found something that seemed too good to be true. A guy named Luke had posted an ad for a room in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent was only $1,200 a month, which was an absolute steal for the area. He mentioned in the listing that he'd be gone most of the time, meaning I'd have the place to myself a lot. But there were rules. No parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, no entering the basement. That last one caught my attention, but I figured it was for storage or something. It didn't seem like a big deal. I met Luke to check out the house. The second he opened the door, I could tell he was off. He was quiet, awkward, and his voice shook when he talked. His hands trembled slightly as he led me through the house, explaining the rules again, especially the basement. He kept emphasizing it. The basement is off limits. I use it for storage. I didn't ask questions. The room I was renting was already furnished, which was nice. The house was clean and had an open floor plan. Everything seemed fine, so I moved in. Luke gave me a key to my bedroom, which I appreciated. He told me I could lock it whenever I wanted privacy. It seemed like a thoughtful gesture at first, but then I started noticing things. Luke was always home. His car was always in the driveway, no matter what time I left or came back. He said he wouldn't be around much, but it was starting to feel like he never left. Then there were the noises. Heavy footsteps, doors opening and closing. At first, I thought maybe he had a weird sleep schedule, but one night, I got up to use the bathroom and noticed the basement door was open. A dim light flickered from the bottom of the stairs. I stepped closer and heard banging, metal against metal, rhythmic and sharp. Then silence. Luke emerged from the darkness, staring up at me from the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a cold, flat voice, he said, "Shut the basement door." I swallowed hard and did what he said. That was the first time I felt genuinely afraid of him. A week later, something even stranger happened. I came home from work and found my bedroom door unlocked. I always locked it before leaving. When I stepped inside, I knew someone had been in there. My clothes in the dresser were messy, like they had been rifled through. My closet door, which I always kept shut, was slightly open. Nothing was missing, but everything felt wrong. I went straight to Luke's room and knocked. No answer, but his car was right outside. I tried again, nothing. I gave up and went back to my room, locking the door behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to get out of there. I started searching for new listings that night. Then, I made a stupid decision. Luke was finally gone. His car was missing. I had the house to myself, so I went into the basement. The light switch didn't work, so I used my phone's flashlight. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. The air grew thick and musty, the smell of something rotting filling my nose. The basement was tiny, just one main room with a filthy tan carpet and a single ugly couch in the middle. There was another door, tucked in the corner. A sickening stench was coming from it. I tried the handle, locked. I stared at the door, heart pounding. Then I heard something, a rustling, like movement on the other side. I turned and ran back up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. That night, I barely slept, but what happened next was worse. I woke up to a creaking sound. My room was pitch black. For a second, I was disoriented. Then I heard it again, the sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. My heart stopped. I turned my head and saw Luke standing over my bed, leaning down, watching me. I screamed. He put a finger to his lips. Shh. I lunged for my phone, but he grabbed my wrist. "Did you go into the basement?" I shook my head frantically. "Are you sure?" he asked, his grip tightening. I was shaking. I swear I didn't. He let go and straightened up. "Good." Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, he said, "I think you should find other living arrangements." Then he turned and walked out. I started packing immediately. I didn't care about losing money. I wasn't staying another second in that house. I banged on his door, demanding some of my rent back since I'd only been there for 2 weeks. After a few seconds, his door creaked open, but he didn't come out. Instead, he extended his arm, holding a small stack of cash. He never showed his face. I snatched the money and ran. I slept in my car that night, too scared to go anywhere else. The next day, I called my parents. Despite everything, they welcomed me back. I moved out again later, but I never told them the full story. I still wonder what was in that basement, and what would have happened if I hadn't woken up before he did something worse. Now, whenever I look for a new place, I remember Luke, and I always trust my instincts. Because if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. It was my junior year of college when I moved off campus into a student apartment building. I had been assigned a random roommate, someone else who needed a place to stay. His name was David. At first, David seemed completely normal. He was polite, quiet, and always smiling. We made small talk when we crossed paths in the apartment, and he never gave me a reason to feel uncomfortable. But that feeling didn't last. It started with small things. David had an odd habit of lingering in my room a little too long, asking weirdly personal questions. Stuff like whether I had a girlfriend, what my family was like, what time I usually went to sleep. At first, I brushed it off as him trying to be friendly. But the more time I spent around him, the more uncomfortable I got. Then came the sounds at night. David would whisper in his room at strange hours, barely loud enough for me to hear through the thin walls. Sometimes, I'd hear footsteps shuffling around in the hallway past midnight. It was unsettling, but I convinced myself that maybe he was just watching TV or talking on the phone. Then one night, I decided to check. I got out of bed and pressed my ear against David's door. I could hear him whispering, his voice muffled and low, but he wasn't talking to anyone. Then suddenly, he stopped. For a second, everything was completely silent. Then he said my name. Jeff. A chill shot up my spine. Did he know I was standing outside his door? I tiptoed back to my room as quietly as I could and locked my door. I spent the rest of the night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with paranoia. The next night, it got worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of whispers, but this time, they weren't coming from inside David's room. They were coming from the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. I froze, holding my breath as I listened. I could barely make out the words, but I knew it was David's voice. Then, just like the night before, he whispered, "Jeff?" I swallowed my fear and called out, "David, you good?" Silence. Then I heard his footsteps retreating to his room. The next night, it escalated again. I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. I could hear David's footsteps in the hallway. I had locked my door before bed. I was sure of it. The next morning, I confronted him. I asked if he sleepwalked or had any kind of sleep disorder. At first, he looked confused, almost like he was trying to think of the right answer. Then he gave a short nod and said, "Yeah, sometimes." I didn't believe him. Something was wrong. That night, when I got back to the apartment and saw that my bedroom door was unlocked again, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to find out what he was hiding. So the next day, while David was out, I went into his room. I knew I didn't have much time, so I searched quickly. Drawers, closets, under the bed. Nothing. But then at the back of his closet, I found a small hidden drawer. I pulled it open and my stomach dropped. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Of me. Most of them were of me sleeping. Some of them were so close up that I could see the individual pores on my face. But there was something worse. Mixed in with my photos were pictures of another guy. Someone about my age, someone I didn't recognize. My mind started racing. Had David done this to his last roommate too? I felt sick. I grabbed a handful of photos as evidence, took a quick picture of the drawer with my phone, and then got out of his room as fast as possible. I knew I couldn't confront him alone. Instead, I went straight to student housing and showed them the pictures. They took it very seriously. I was immediately reassigned to a new apartment with a different roommate. I never spoke to David again. A week later, I found out that David had moved out. No one knew where he went. No one talked about him. I should have felt safe. But then something even more disturbing happened. One night, about a month later, I woke up to my phone buzzing. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something in my gut told me to. When I picked up, I heard breathing, then a low whisper. "Jeff?" I hung up immediately, my heart racing. I blocked the number, but the feeling of being watched never left me. A week later, a letter arrived at my new apartment. No return address, Inside was one single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my bedroom window. I moved again, and to this day, I still don't know where David went. Or worse, if he ever really left. When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the company now, but thankfully, I've been able to move back to my hometown. At the time, though, I needed a place to live that wouldn't break the bank. I made posts on just about every website looking for a roommate. Facebook, Craigslist, even my neighborhood subreddit. Eventually, a guy named Rob reached out to me on Facebook. He told me he had a room available in his house and the rent was way cheaper than anything else I had seen. I checked his pictures to see if he looked normal. He did. He seemed clean-cut, friendly, and harmless. My parents were totally against me living with a male roommate, but I figured as long as he was normal and professional, it would be fine. Rob and I FaceTimed, and he gave me a virtual tour of the house. He owned the place outright and said he wasn't home very often because of his work schedule. He was polite and soft-spoken, nothing that raised any red flags. His only rules were no parties, no large gatherings, and no going into the basement. A week later, I packed my things and drove down. Rob met me out front. The first thing I noticed about him, he was shorter than I expected. About eye level with me. That wasn't a big deal, but I also noticed he was awkward in person. He didn't make much eye contact and mumbled a lot. He helped me carry some of my heavier bags inside and showed me my room. It was already furnished since his last roommate had just moved out. I swapped out the sheets with my own and settled in. Rob seemed friendly, maybe even too friendly. He asked a lot of personal questions that I wasn't really comfortable answering, but I chalked it up to him just trying to get to know me. The next day was Sunday, and Rob offered to drive me around town to show me around. I didn't really want to, but I said yes to start things off on a good note. After showing me around, he suddenly suggested we grab lunch together. I politely declined, saying I wasn't hungry. Then he suggested drinks. Again, I declined, saying I don't drink on work nights. He kept pushing, insisting, "Come on, just 1 or 2 drinks." I laughed it off, politely refusing again. That's when his whole vibe shifted. He got really quiet, and the energy in the car changed. He barely said another word the rest of the ride home. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few days later, I was doing laundry when I noticed something disturbing. My laundry hamper, which had been full of clothes, looked like it had been moved. At first, I thought maybe I had just misremembered how I left it. But then, while loading the washing machine, I realized a pair of my underwear was missing. I searched everywhere, the hamper, my closet, my drawers. Gone. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I lost them somewhere, maybe I misplaced them. But deep down, I knew. A horrible, creeping suspicion crawled into my mind. Had Rob been in my room? I refused to believe it just yet. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought a lockable doorknob. While Rob was out, I installed it myself. Now I could have some peace of mind. That night, I woke up to banging on my door. It was Rob. He was calling my name in an angry voice. I checked the time. It was 1:30 in the morning. I froze in bed, pretending to be asleep. I was too scared to answer. The next morning, I got a series of angry texts from Rob. "We need to talk. Be home after work." I texted back, "Is this about the doorknob?" His reply, "Yes. Take it off today." I felt sick. I texted him back, apologizing and explaining that as a woman, I just felt safer having a lock on my door. I thought he'd understand. His reply was short and cold. "No, take it off." How did he even know I installed it? The only way he could have found out was if he had tried to get into my room. I felt violated. I switched the doorknob back, but I knew I had to get out of there. Then, something happened that confirmed all my fears. One afternoon, while Rob was out, there was a knock at the door. A woman